Hey y'all, it's Leela with Miss Kiss Kreations. Welcome back to my channel. Today's Tumbler tutorial, I'm going to show you how I created this Bubbly Witch's Brew tumbler. Like always, all of my materials will be listed in my description below, including some direct links and coupon codes for y'all to use. And don't forget, you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. With all that being said, let's go ahead and get started. I'm working with a 16-ounce stainless steel tumbler that I sanded with a 180 grit sanding block, and I wiped down with 91% alcohol. I then taped the inside and spray painted the tumbler black, and then I let that dry. I'm going to be applying my glitter using the Mod Podge method. The glitters I'm using is from Glitter Heart Co., Magic Potion, and Midnight Madness. What I did was I wanted to use both of these colors, so I just mixed these in the cup. I try to mix them 50-50, but y'all know with my heavy hand, I just mixed them until I found a pretty color. So I placed that in the cup and then I mixed with my wooden stick there. Again, I am using the Mod Podge method to apply my glitter to my tumbler, and I just place a lot of Mod Podge using my Mod Podge brush all around my tumbler, making sure that I get every single spot. If you do not get every spot of your tumbler, don't worry. After you apply your glitter to your tumbler, you can always go back in and touch the areas or touch up the areas that you don't apply the glitter. Again, applying all my glitter to my tumbler. Now this was a custom mix, so I had to add more glitter, or if you add a little bit, just keep placing the glitter back in the cup and then back on the tumbler and then keep going. So once my glitter was completely applied to my tumbler, I let it sit for about 15 minutes to let the Mod Podge kind of dry, especially if you have a thick coat of Mod Podge on there. And once that Mod Podge was dried, I then went in with my crystal clear acrylic coating from Kreations. This will be linked in my Amazon store. I spray a couple coats of this and then I let this dry for about 15 to 20 minutes before moving on to the next step. And once my spray sealer was dried on my tumbler, I went in with 20 milliliters of epoxy. That's 10 part A and 10 part B. Do keep in mind, if you are adding chunky glitter to this tumbler, you will need more epoxy for this tumbler. I wasn't so concerned about making this tumbler smooth because I'm only adding a printed decal on this tumbler and I'm only adding the drip. So I did add a lot of epoxy, but if it wasn't smooth in certain areas, I really wasn't worried about it. This is my fast set epoxy, so I let this sit on the cup turner for about 2 hours. I then turn off my cup turner, I let it dry for another couple hours, and then my tumbler was ready for its next step. Once my epoxy was cured on my tumbler, I went in with a 220 grit sanding block and I sanded around the tumbler, just trying to sand down any little pieces of glitter that might have been sticking up or any pieces of epoxy that may have been sticking up. Make sure you're not pressing very hard on this process because you don't want to sand away any of the glitter. I then took an X-Acto knife and I cut around the rim of the tumbler, removing any of that epoxy that may have been placed on that rim, just giving me a nice and clean rim. I do this after every epoxy step, and then I took a sanding block and I sanded around the rim, and then I took 91% alcohol and I wiped the tumbler down. I found these print then cut decals or designs on Etsy. The shop will be linked in my description below. And then I printed them on white vinyl. I will have that linked below, also available in my Amazon storefront. I cut around those decals, and what I always do, since I do the print then cut on Cricut, sometimes it doesn't cut around it as I like to cut around it. So I take my scissors and I try to cut off any of those white pieces. For some reason, they really do get to me, so I just cut around those areas just to clean it up a little bit. And then I place the decal right on my tumbler. I place down the center first, and then I rub on the edges, like towards the edge. So I start from the middle, and then I go to the outside of the tumbler. And I did do 2 of these just to show you how cute they are. And then once I was finished with that, you don't have to seal that or anything. You just print that out, place it on the, well, print it, cut it, and then place it on your tumbler, and then you're ready to go with the next step. I have these cute rhinestones that I also found on Amazon, will be linked in my description below. I'm placing my rhinestones with UV resin. You can use any type of adhesive that you want, but I thought UV resin for me was going to be the easiest and the fastest way to place these stones. These are like half stones, so like they're like little plastic rhinestones, and they're super cute. So what I did was I placed them on the tumbler after applying that UV resin, and then I used my light just to cure the UV resin. It takes about a minute, 30 seconds to a minute to really cure that resin onto that tumbler. And I just did these one by one. If you do have like a tweezers or any weeding tools to grab the smaller rhinestones, I do recommend that. And I also recommend you wearing gloves because you are working with resin. This was my first time applying these rhinestones to a tumbler, or these little half beads to a tumbler, and my first time doing this bubbly drip tumbler. So what I would have done differently in the past is only add a rhinestone at a time or bead at a time, because once you add that UV resin on the tumbler and you add that stone to there, it starts falling down and then you kind of start freaking out. So sometimes it's not placed where you want it to be placed. I would have also added a lot more if I would have known, but I'm just going to take that and just apply that to my next tumbler. So add these beads more or less, however you want to make it. I always tell y'all these videos are just for y'all inspiration. So I hope that whatever you guys create, you guys just are inspired by this tumbler, and I'm sure it's going to look beautiful. And once my beads were placed on my tumbler, I used Apple Barrel, Spring Green, and Lime Sherbet. I mixed those two colors together because, of course, I didn't want either color. I had to just mix them, right? So I mixed them together, and then what I did was, you don't have to do this step, but I took a paintbrush and I painted around those beads area. The reason why I did this is because whenever I do my drip, just in case that drip is too thin and you can see those beads, I wanted the beads to be green and not the white or the pearly look. So again, this is completely optional. Let this dry. This took about 5 to 15 minutes max. And then once that was dry, I just went in with my drip. The way that I'm doing my drip is I'm using 10 milliliters of epoxy. That's 5 part A and 5 part B. I am mixing that epoxy before I start applying my additive to this epoxy to create that drip. So make sure your epoxy is completely cured. And then I'm using Nice and Thick from CC DIY. What this does is this allows your epoxy to get very thick in a very short amount of time. So instead of waiting for your epoxy to thicken up over 30-45 minutes, you add this powder to your epoxy. And yes, you have to add a lot of powder a little bit at a time, but it allows your epoxy to thicken up very quickly. If you want your drip to glow and you want to add mica powder or glow powder to this drip, I do not recommend using the Nice and Thick to make your epoxy cure quicker, only because I did this about a year ago. I added the Nice and Thick and then I added the mica powder, glow powder to my epoxy, and for some reason that powder like eliminates that glow powder. So I don't know if I was doing anything wrong or maybe I missed a step, but if I did, I would like to know. So please leave your comments down in the comments below. Again, so if you are using your mica powder and you want your drip to glow, I would just add it to my epoxy, add my paint to my epoxy for the color, and then I would just wait out my epoxy or use fast setting epoxy for your epoxy to dry quicker, and then add the drip without using the Nice and Thick additive. I then added my Apple Barrel paints into the epoxy and I mixed those in until I was satisfied with the color. And of course, I wanted a little bit of sparkle to this drip, so I added some Slime Time from Glitter Heart Co. And then I mixed that until I was satisfied with the consistency of my drip. You want your epoxy to be runny, but you don't want it to be dripping so quickly down from your cup or your popsicle stick. So you want it to be pretty much halfway cured, in my opinion. because I don't like my drips to go all the way down towards the bottom of my tumbler. So it depends on how high or how low you want your drip. Once I was satisfied with the consistency, I took my wooden spoon or my wooden stick, and then I applied my drip to the very top of the rim. All I do is I place my popsicle stick inside of the epoxy, and then I smear it around the top of my tumbler. Now, since I do have those beads on my tumbler, I'm making sure that I'm hitting that drip with those beads, so those beads can be covered with the drip to make it look like my tumbler is bubbling at the top. And by the time I was finished with this or wrapping up with this drip, my epoxy cured very quickly. So it was getting harder to apply that drip to the tumbler, which is a good thing because you want it to be almost dried or almost cured by the time you're finished adding your drip. Whenever I was finished adding my drip, I always place my tumblers upside down on my drying rack like so, and then I just keep an eye on it for the next hour or so, and then I let that dry for about 4 to 8 hours depending on the brand of epoxy I'm using. And here it is whenever it's dried. Again, taking that X-Acto knife and getting rid of any of that excess epoxy on the rim, just cleaning it up a little bit, and then I took my sanding block again and I sanded around the rim area one more time. And then once I was finished sanding, I took that 91% alcohol and then I wiped around the rim again, just to making sure that I'm getting rid of any of that excess oils I may have added to the tumbler. And now to epoxy over that drip in that label or decal, I'm using 10 milliliters of epoxy. That's 5 part A and 5 part B. I added 2 coats of epoxy to this tumbler. The reason why I added 2 thin coats is because I didn't want my epoxy to pool underneath that green drip. So I added that 10 milliliters of epoxy, I let it spin, I let my tumbler cure, and then I went in with another 10 milliliters of epoxy and I let that spin and cure for that final coat. And once that final coat of epoxy was completely cured on my tumbler, I used my X-Acto knife to clean up the rim one last time, and then I used some Dawn dish soap to clean up the inside of the tumbler. And here's the final tumbler. This is super duper adorable. I really loved how this tumbler turned out. I'm so excited for Halloween and these spooky witch tumblers. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, please be sure to give me a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more tumbler and craft videos. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and I'll see y'all next time.